Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to webinar 5 of our Indian Energy Minerals Forum 2022 webinar series on hydrogen power on tribal lands. So this will be presented and moderated by Derek Watchman and Steve Gray of the Sagebrush Hill Group. So just a little bit about our program. I'm Michelle Littlefield in the USEA Consensus Program. It's a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. The program educates the public policymakers, industry, and stakeholders on CCUS and carbon management technologies. We do this by hosting webinars. We release monthly news clips. We have a series of monthly educational briefings. And, and we also include related updates. To join our mailing list, feel free to send an email to the address at the bottom of your screen. So a little bit of housekeeping for Q&A. We will have Q&A sessions throughout this webinar. Please use the raise your hand button or the Q&A button during the presentations. We'll get to as many as we can. This webinar will also be recorded and the presentation slides will be available on our webpage. But we do appreciate you taking the time to join us in person. With that, I'll pass along to Derek Watchman and Steve Gray of Sagebrush Hill Group. Derek, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. Thank you, Michelle, appreciate it. And hey everybody, I'm Derek Watchman. I'm the president owner of Sagebrush Hill Group, LLC. And my associate Steve Gray and I are here to bring to you a very timely initiative and project. And that's basically hydrogen hubs. And so a little bit of background for those of you that maybe haven't had the opportunity. My company is under engagement by the United States Energy Association and the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office of DOE to present a series of tribal energy related webinars. And actually this is our third round. And so for those of you that maybe participated in our second series, we had a basic introduction into hydrogen. Both we talked about blue and green and other forms of hydrogen. And so in this third series, given the push from the White House and the Department of Energy to look at hydrogen as potential clean fuel, we decided to present this webinar. And so we have some great guests here today. Steve and I's big focus is, and Steve we'll get into this, is just how do we improve the economies of tribal reservations, and how do we improve potential revenue sources, and how do we provide information that will assist and afford tribes the ability to move forward on the resources that they have on their lands. And so my company is out of Winter Rock, Arizona, and I'm actually from a little town called Navajo, New Mexico. And so I've been involved in energy off and on for good 3 decades, and so I'm glad to be here. So I'll turn it over to Steve to introduce himself, but I appreciate everybody here and thank you for joining us. Steve.
Thank you, Derek, and good morning to everyone, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We are very pleased once again to be able to talk about hydrogen and the impact to Indian country. We're very pleased. As we go through this transition, as tribes go through the transition, they are learning that they have to look at these other options, particularly the fossil fuel communities. And one of the things that we're so proud is to be able to bring various experts from throughout to be able to share with us what they are doing and what they are seeing as we transition to clean energy initiatives like hydrogen. Tribes are in a unique position because they have some of that resource on their land. And as an energy tribe, energy entity, this is one source we feel is very important because it's classified as clean energy. And how do you do it? We're very pleased that the Biden-Harris administration has supported this clean source of hydrogen. We're very pleased that they're putting some dollars out there to see what the market can hold. Our job, is to try to open that discussion wider for the tribal community so that they can see the economic development opportunity and that they can start to see if this will fit within their use. Because within that hydrogen, there's a number of areas that we could look at: the production of it, the processing of it, the delivery of it, the storage, the people that will use it at the end. So there's many things that come with hydrogen. Also the technologies, a big one that everybody's talking about is the fuel cells. So for the transportation industry. So there are some opportunities there. We hope today's presenters will be able to share with the audience what some of those opportunities are. We hope the tribes will, and the tribal communities will take heed to it and start to look at seeing if this is something that fits within their economic development efforts. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Derek to introduce our first speaker, but we thank you very much for joining us. Derek?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I want to extend my appreciation to USEA for hosting this. And so you met Michelle earlier, and we'll probably have a few words from Mike Moore, who's also a part of USEA. But we have three great speakers in store for everybody. And so we're just going to go down the agenda pursuant to the announcement. So I'd like to turn the time over to Mr. Wiley Rhodes, who is the board member of Newport Companies. And my apologies, Wiley, I don't have my, the bio in front of me, but I want to say thank you for joining us. And I'm excited to hear about your information. So I'll turn the time over to you, Mr. Rhodes,
Sure.
and welcome. And thank you for joining us. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Yep, it's a pleasure to be here. It was I got the chance to meet Steve in Flagstaff at the hydrogen roundtable there, and he's been able to involve us in a few meetings since. So I was curious. I had a computer issue this morning, and I'm traveling, so I apologize for the light. I don't have a lot to work with visually. But anyway, I'm making the best with what I had. But I just sent over my presentation to Michelle a few minutes ago, and I wanted to see if she was able to get it up.
Hey, yeah, give me one moment. I'll have it.
Okay. And so just to get started, we started working in the environmental world in about 2014, 2015, working on processes and technologies that focus on reducing and mitigating the environmental impact of oil and gas production and transportation. I was able to do a event with Ed Salzberg and Amory Lovins a few years ago, and Ed was kind enough to host that event. So that was where we began this fascinating journey of not only reducing environmental issues, but also taking advantage of the energy that's contained in these hydrocarbon molecules. So as I'm sure everyone will recognize the facility there, everyone in Arizona and New Mexico, this is the Escalante generating station that's located right outside of Pruitt, New Mexico, in between Gallup and Grants. So in 2019, we were able to begin to evaluate the quality of that plant and began work on it in 2020. On the next slide, this is just a general idea of what NewPoint's done. Traditionally, we've been a midstream company since we started in 1999, but we've executed projects all over the world, worked for a lot of very reputable companies, and have really built on that in developing new technologies into the other things that we've evolved into. On the next slide, we'll get into the real meat of what it is that we came here to talk about. So as I stated, New Point was established in 1999, and the concepts built around what we started out doing, what we still do, is design and manufacture facilities that remove the contaminants from natural gas. So whenever natural gas is produced, it has carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, arsenic, contaminants like that. And so our company is focused on the management of these molecules and separating those to improve the quality of the gas, or to just remove any poisonous contaminants like arsenic or H2S. In 2004, we developed a process that takes oxygen out of natural gas. And in that process, we discovered that there's a large amount of water that's produced in the combustion of all hydrocarbons. So we began to evaluate processes and how we could capture at least the water in all the flared gas that's being flared around the world. And at the time, we were doing some projects out in the Middle East, and the value of water is a lot higher there than the value of natural gas. So we began to explore how we could at least capture the value of the water, even if the balance of that flow had to be vented or flared. So it took us 15 years to crack that, and I'll get back to that in just a second. In 2015, we began to work on methane emissions. As I mentioned, our event with Ed Salzberg, with Amory Lovins and Alice Madden from the University of Colorado. And those processes, we've been able to deploy a few of those in improving the revenue streams from oil and gas production, but also eliminating or reducing the methane emissions on oil and gas production sites. In 2017, with Rocky Mountain Institute, we designed what we call the well site of the future. And the concepts that are built around that are to not store any of the hydrocarbons on site, but to be able to flow directly from the well through a processing unit and directly into the pipelines that come to the site. In 2019, as I mentioned, we began to look at utilizing hydrogen as fuel for power generation. And I know that's what we came here to talk about today, so I'll begin my focus there. So to build the concepts around being able to capture the water from hydrocarbons, we were trying to capture the water from the combustion of natural gas. Well, in 2019, Zane, my little brother, who's also my partner in 2 Point, called, and he said that he thought he had finally figured it out. And the way that he accomplished it was that if you remove the carbon pre-combustion from the gas stream, you sequester the carbon, but all you're sending over to the power generation boiler or turbine is hydrogen. So the management of that flow is a whole lot easier. It's easier to dissipate the heat. So using the heat that's generated in that combustion, you run a steam turbine, and then you condense the water out of it. And so on average, you get about 102 million gallons of water per year of production out of 100 megawatts of power generation, which is substantial. I was talking to the former chairman of FERC, and he said, well, Wiley, in the water world, 102 million gallons is not that much. And I said, well, you're right, unless you don't have it. And in the West, we all know that water demand is just continuing to increase all over that part of the world. So the interesting thing about the water that's produced in that process is it's deionized. So in the production of green hydrogen, the water has to be deionized in order to not contaminate the electrolysis process. So this water is produced naturally. That's the end result. We don't have to purify it any further. We run it through a carbon filter, and then it's ready for green hydrogen production. In 2020, we were looking for combined cycle turbines that would run on 100% hydrogen. We discovered that there's not any. So I asked my guys, you mean to tell me in this day and age, the only thing you can do with 100% hydrogen is boil water? And the response was yes. So that's whenever we started exploring an opportunity to buy a coal-fired power plant, because that's all they do. They just use coal as the fuel instead of hydrogen. We were involved in an environmental organization in Washington, D.C., NRECA, and we were introduced to them by a fellow board member. And so Jim Spires, who was headed up their R&D department there, told us about the Escalante generating station in New Mexico. We engaged with Tri-State about the purchase of that facility in late 2020. COVID kind of slowed us down like it did everybody. And we were able to enter into an agreement to purchase that facility in early 2021. We did the press release on that project in April, and in May of 2021, Tallgrass Energy contacted us, and they are now 75% owners and our partners in the Escalante generating station. In 2020, we also became involved with Ohio University to reindustrialize a DOE site in Pike County, Ohio. We launched that project this year. We did the press release last month, and that facility is H2 Trillium Energy and Manufacturing, or we call it H2 Team, but it's all built around the concepts that we'll talk about around clean hydrogen as fuel and power, and to be able to utilize these energy and fuel sources for manufacturing. So on the next slide, whenever you repurpose a existing coal facility, it's interesting that the process that we went through. Whenever you look at the Escalante station, the part on the very far left is really the only piece that's needed for power generation. Whenever you convert it to hydrogen, all of the components on the right-hand side, and the majority of those, are for the coal handling and pulverization system. So in the utilizing hydrogen as fuel, we began to explore what would be the best process to integrate into this existing facility, because it had been maintained just as well as the generating station. So Zane came up with the production of green cement. You have the rail system there, unload the cars, the conveyors, the pulverizing system. To convert from coal to green cement, the only thing that you would have to do would be to modify the pulverizers to increase the tensile strength so that the pulverizers would be able to handle the limestone, but build a hydrogen-fired kiln, and you can produce green cement, and then you rail that back out and for transportation to California or wherever it might be needed. The revenue that's generated from green cement is substantial, and it's a great complement to supplement the revenue from the power generation, because in order for that part of the facility to compete, you've got to get the price down so that it's competitive, and so the margins are pretty slim there. On the next slide. This is our H2 Trillium Energy and Manufacturing site. It's the development of the country's first complete integrated energy system and closed loop manufacturing facility. We have 3,700 acres there that the DOE manages. We've got 248 acres that we're reindustrializing in phase one. So on the next slide. This is an overall design, and this is one of the slides that I showed in Flagstaff. Whenever you start looking at integrated energy systems and this closed loop manufacturing, and you look at it from the standpoint of you take the waste of one process and use it as the feedstock to the next, there's a lot of things that begin to connect. Amory Lovins always speaks about the most wasted energy resource in our country is heat. Process heat's generated in every process in every industrial facility, and it's not fully utilized. And a lot of the energy that's created in that process is just dissipated into the atmosphere. So what we've done is just list here just some general concepts that you can integrate together so that you capture not only the value of the heat, but you can also utilize the waste from one such as coal pyrolysis. Whenever you use the pyrolysis process, you eliminate the carbon emissions from coal, but then the waste stream of that would be fly ash. And one of the things that we I think we need to start thinking about is to where we're going to get fly ash as we continue to retire these coal-powered generation facilities. We've also looked at integrating additional energy inputs into the system. So using hydrogen as the fuel to boil water gives you an opportunity to integrate into or stub out for different energy inputs. And at the site in Ohio, we want to be able to also incorporate small modular reactors. Water doesn't care where the heat comes from, it just needs heat to boil. So that's another great process that you can integrate into this system to be able to prove up technologies, give them a test at scale, and to be able to have those to reduce the amount of carbon, not only that has to be sequestered, but to also improve the efficiencies over time. You can also use concentrated solar, which would be a great process to incorporate in the West. You have plenty of sunshine out there, not as much water as they have out here in the East, but that's a great process to incorporate into it too. And then that way you can continue to grow the facility over time and to add these energy inputs, making it more efficient. But jobs are created around all of those processes and technologies at every phase. And I think that as Steve and I talked, the biggest thing that we have to be conscious of, I think, are the people that are in the communities that are displaced in this transition. In 2002, we designed and installed a helium purification facility that we installed right outside of Shiprock. And so we're familiar with a lot of the challenges that the Navajo Nation faces. We also worked on the Hickory Apache Nation and installed a couple of processing facilities out there. But every box that's represented in this diagram represents jobs, whether it's jobs to mine or collect the feedstock, bringing it to a central facility, using woody biomass, using coal, using plastic. All of those inputs can be incorporated into these designs, all under the production of hydrogen, capturing the carbon for energy and clean power and clean energy production. On the next slide. The reindustrialization of these different sites, including those on the Navajo Nation, we think that New Mexico and Arizona has the best infrastructure in the country for transporting products. You have the Interstate 10, Interstate 40, you have the natural gas pipelines that run parallel to each of those. And then you also have a lot of power infrastructure so that you can transport power east and west. So the jobs in clean energy production and manufacturing, as I said, that's the focus of everything that we do. You can do renewable energy, and they're a great energy source, but they don't provide a lot of long-term operations and maintenance jobs. The type of processes that we're utilizing produce about 80% of what was employed, for instance, at a formerly coal-fired power plant. One of the issues that we think that's important at the state and federal level is to be able to get primacy in each state for the Class 6 permitting process. The EPA handles it now, and the process takes a long time, and it's very extensive. Not to reduce the specifications on the permitting process, but we believe that if each state was able to manage that process, that it could be that the process could be sped up so that you can begin construction and operations sooner. We also need to finalize pore space ownership. That's something that is handled at the state level, but there's just not been a lot of decisions that have been made on that. There's been a lot of discussions around it. And then also to include hydrogen power into the renewable portfolio standard at each state. Right now, most of the hydrogen utilization is centered around fuel for cars. We think that that should be expanded and to be able to include manufacturing processes and power generation as well. We also are putting together a public-private partnership in Ohio to develop the Piketon facility, and utilizing the higher education organizations in this part of the country to also contribute R&D and technology development in the facility. And when mutually beneficial, support and collaborate in the response to the relevant federal and state funding announcements. The Biden administration has made several programs available to organizations and projects like ours, and but the resources that it takes to respond to those is extensive. And we think that every local community are to join forces to work together to help support that resources that it takes to respond to those. And on the last slide, ESG is just the biggest topic of discussion, mitigating carbon emissions. But, and if carbon emissions is the driver, the processes that we've laid out utilizing natural gas as the feedstock reduces carbon over 95% over what a traditional facility would be. It's not perfect. There's a lot of work that can still be done, but we think that our processes, whenever you incorporate the job requirements to operate these facilities, far outweighs it not being 100% clean, it not being green hydrogen. But as I mentioned earlier, we do support the renewable processes of green hydrogen production as well. So that was what I had.
Okay, thank you, Wally.
You bet.
That was very informative. And again, Mr. Rhodes is with the Newport Company. And, this is one example that we feel is out there, kind of exciting, as they do the conversion with a power plant that's here in the Southwest and using hydrogen. So we're watching it very enthusiastically. We've put the word out to area tribes that these are the type of things that we've just got to keep an eye on. So with that, we'll go on to our next presenter. And we're very pleased today to have Miss Maria Eisman joining us and sharing with us what they are doing. I was able to reach out to Ms. Eisman through an organization that is a consortium of hydrogen here in the West, and through some of my colleagues over at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so they highly recommended that we talk with the Colorado Energy Office person and the senior analyst out there, who is Ms. Eisman. And they thought her information will be very informative to us as well, to hear what she has to say. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Eisman.
Thank you. Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to put the slides up from your end?
It would be a bit more smooth if you could do it. You should be able to share your
Okay.
screen from there.
See? Right here. Are you seeing my, hold on, let me get it in presentation mode. There we go. How's that?
Looks good.
Okay, so thank you. My name is Maria DiBiase Eisman. I'm the Senior Transportation Policy Analyst at the Colorado Energy Office. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the journey we've been on with clean hydrogen and our interaction with the Clean Hydrogen Hub potential funding. I hope that it's going to give the tribal groups some context for where a Western state collaboration is and how you might fit into that, because we'd really be interested in working with the tribe. So I hope the information I give you today, it gives you some context to what's going on and some useful information. So let me start out with where's Colorado at? How did we get to this place where we're really interested in clean hydrogen? Well, there's a lot of Colorado and federal policies that got us there. One of the first and most important ones is that our state has some really ambitious climate action goals. We have targets for reducing GHG emissions 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050 from 2005 levels. So in order for us to keep on track and meet those goals, we like to do analysis to support what we're doing. So we developed a GHG roadmap, and that roadmap, charted a course for us. And it also found and told us that low carbon fuels such as hydrogen are really essential after 2030 and really need to start ramping up between 2025 and 2030. We need to use those for us to meet these GHG reduction goals. So in order for us to further understand, okay, how are we going to start this hydrogen economy, low carbon hydrogen economy, we did another analysis, which was a low carbon hydrogen roadmap for the state. And that identified some actions that we could take. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. We released that in October of 2021. In November of 2021, the federal government came out with the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, and that allocated $8 billion for 4 or more regional hubs. So in February of 2022, and I'm going to talk more about all these things, we signed an MOU called the Western Interstates Hydrogen Hub with the states of Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. And that established a framework for us to coordinate and develop a hub in response to this opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to start out I'm going to talk to you about our roadmap, because I think it will give you some important insight into, the conclusions that we come to, and it might be applicable to your different states as well. But the objective of our roadmap was to define what low carbon hydrogen meant for Colorado, give us some information about the state of the hydrogen market. What are the opportunities for hydrogen in Colorado? What steps can we take to overcome barriers and build in a hydrogen economy? And what was the economic potential? Now, I'm not going to go over all these things. I'm just going to share with you some things that I think you might find interesting and give you some context. So I'll start out. It sounds like you already had a webinar on blue and green hydrogen, but I'll just go over it really quick for those of you that weren't on that webinar, because it's really important as we continue this discussion. The industry, many people in the industry use colors to describe hydrogen. Many people in the industry don't like using the colors because they think it's too simplistic, but it is a simple system for a high level description of the different kinds of hydrogen. So in the low carbon camp, we have green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable electricity like solar and wind. We have pink hydrogen, which is produced from nuclear energy. And we have blue hydrogen, which is produced from some kind of steam or methane reforming with carbon capture. That's called blue hydrogen. A fossil-based hydrogen that does not have carbon capture would be gray hydrogen that comes from reforming and from like a natural gas. And then brown hydrogen would come from coal. So in our roadmap, we defined low carbon hydrogen as hydrogen produced with significantly reduced life cycle GHG emissions compared to how they were already doing it. And that would mean green hydrogen from renewable electricity and blue hydrogen produced from a fossil-based source with carbon capture and storage. This chart here is really interesting. It shows you in the upper right-hand corner, we have most commercially viable and commercially and cost-effectively viable in the upper right-hand corner. And as you go more towards the lower right-hand corner, it's less commercially and viable. I'm getting my words. Okay. So up in the upper right-hand corner, we have forklifts. We already know that a lot of our grocery stores such as Kroger and Walmart are already using hydrogen forklifts. We see medium and heavy duty vehicles over there on the left-hand side. And that those appear to be very good. Our study showed us that those are very good viable options in the near term. Moving more to the right, we see a really big option in electric long duration storage or peaking, hydrogen pipeline blending, other heavy duty transportation, industrial manufacturing, and refining. As we move more to the right, which is less commercially and cost effective, we see light duty vehicles. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We see that less viable than the medium and heavy duty sector. And then commercial and residential heating. And really the reason for commercial and residential heating being down there in the less cost effective, less commercially viable category is because there are other low carbon options that kind of compete out for that sector, like maybe heat pumps. So our study told us that the most promising applications in Colorado for hydrogen in the very short term, in the 0 to 5 years, would be in the medium and heavy duty vehicle sector. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but it was shown that some use cases could already be cost effective over other decarbonization options, such as battery electric vehicles. And then in the medium term, we can look at the electric sector, especially as emission targets increase and that need for long duration storage increases. Hydrogen could replace natural gas for electric peaking generation and high temperature industrial processes. I just wanted to share this one chart with you. This talks about hydrogen station fueling costs and how they are going to go down over time is estimated. And just to give you a little bit of context in that as well. Our study showed that pump prices using off-site hydrogen production was more cost effective compared to on-site production, because if you make the hydrogen on-site with an electrolyzer and you're using electricity from the grid, you may have higher electricity prices as opposed to using it, creating the hydrogen from excess solar or wind. However, noting that if that offsite production has the hydrogen coming to the fueling station by pipeline, that, of course, requires some infrastructure investment, and that would only likely become viable when you have a lot of people using it or a lot of use of it, viable at scale. Our study showed that pump prices across all scenarios are expected to decline as electrolyzer costs decline and the station economics improve with increased utilization. And that it also showed that in order for H2 fuel to be competitive with gas and diesel, it would need to come in at around $6 to $8 per kilogram by 2030. And of course, that calculation could have changed with some of the recent developments in the price of gas and diesel right now. I wanted to share this one with you as well. This talks about the operational costs of an internal combustion engine or battery electric vehicle compared to a fuel cell electric vehicle. On the left-hand side here, that first chart compares medium and heavy duty vehicles. And we found that in that segment, hydrogen is shown to be a cost-effective solution compared to electric vehicles now and in the future. And the reason for that is because it has a lower, because most roadways have an 80,000 pound limit, and battery electric vehicles for the medium and heavy duty category are going to need a lot of batteries, and that's heavy and takes up space. So they have lower cargo capacity, which increases the cost for them to operate, and they would have a higher cost per ton of cargo shipped. So the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles compete very, very well in this sector. In the light duty vehicle segment, the study showed that battery electric vehicles kind of outcompeted the future hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. They just were more operationally cost effective today and in the next decade. Now, if Toyota was at this meeting, they'd pipe in and disagree with me, but this is what our study has shown us. Our study showed us. So the roadmap recommended some actions for us. It suggested that we develop a hydrogen plan. It gave us some parameters for production targets and a target for the development of vehicle refueling stations. It suggested we investigate market interest and feasibility of regional early development hydrogen hubs, suggested we do pilot projects, specifically pilot projects on blending of hydrogen into existing gas infrastructure, and that we use an RFI to get more information from the market. So we released that in October of 2021. And as I said, right in November of 2021, out comes the Infrastructure Investment and Job Acts. And that allocated $8 billion for 4 or more regional hydrogen hubs. And they said the purpose for that was to develop a robust, clean hydrogen supply chain and workforce. Workforce was really key by prioritizing clean hydrogen demonstration projects in major shale gas regions and establishing regional clean hydrogen hubs, which would be a network of clean hydrogen producers, clean hydrogen consumers, and connective infrastructure located in close proximity, which we think out west, close proximity might have a different definition than it might on the East Coast, for example. It directs the US Department of Energy to manage this program. And it defined clean hydrogen as the hydrogen produced with a carbon intensity equal to or less than 2 kilograms of CO2 produced per 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. And that we think that there's a lot of questions around what that definition means, and we're still waiting for DOE to provide more a more in-depth definition of clean hydrogen. But they have in some of their presentations shared some tables for some life cycle greenhouse gas calculations on the different types of hydrogen pathways or pathways for producing hydrogen. And I know you probably can't read the slide, so I'll interpret it for you. But in this slide, and again, this is a life cycle calculation as opposed to their definition, which has at the site of production. And that's the definition they're sharing with us currently, is at the site of production. And this is life cycle. But we think we can draw some conclusions from what they shared here. So anyway, the pathways for producing hydrogen that fall below that threshold of 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced would be produced from landfill gas reforming, municipal solid waste digestion, solar or wind electrolysis, nuclear high and low temperature electrolysis, and biomass gasification. They want the hubs to meet at least one, has to meet at least one of each of these categories, a feedstock, at least one of each for out of fossil fuels, renewable energy or nuclear energy, an end use, at least one end use for electric power generation sector, industrial sector, residential commercial heating sector, and the transportation sector. They want the hubs to represent a geographic diversity across the country. And this is really important. They keep emphasizing this whenever you read anything about the hubs. They wanted to provide opportunities for skilled training, long-term employment to the greatest number of residents in the region. So in the IIJA, they said they gave a certain timeline for release of the funding opportunity, and they've already bypassed that. And I'll give you the updated timeline in just a minute. But I wanted to tell you that, you know, the IIJA came out because we had just done that GHG roadmap and our low carbon hydrogen roadmap. We found ourselves very well positioned to seriously consider that opportunity. And so we started talking to other states in the region. And in February of 2022, we signed with New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. We signed an MOU, and we agreed to work together exclusively to compete for one of those hubs. We're also very closely collaborating with the research entities in our states. They organize themselves under the name of RANGE. And we are busy while we're waiting for that FOA, getting organized and talking to potential partners. So here's the latest guidance we got from the DOE on these hubs. They issued a notice of intent, which is the formal announcement that they're going to do the funding opportunity. And that would be in September. They're saying they estimate September, October of 2022. You're going to have to start out with a concept paper. And they emphasized again that principles of equity and justice and the expansion of high-paying, secure, safe union jobs will be an important aspect of any application. So here's they mentioned the tribal groups in the both NOI and the IIJA. They say that applicant teams are encouraged to maximize meaningful early engagement with stakeholders, including tribal communities, to address environmental justice and workforce or other economic concerns and opportunities, including through the use of community benefit agreements or similarly structured partnerships. Tribal communities could be a part of any team. If you'd like more information on that notice of intent, I have the link here. I want to let you know that the WISH states are very interested in collaborating with the tribal groups. We welcome inquiries. We'd like to talk to you. So we hope we can make some contacts. I'm really happy to be here today talking to everybody. I also want to make you aware of another resource that the DOE has provided. It's called H2 Matchmaker. And if you are a potential user, consumer, transporter, or partner in the hubs, you can register on that H2 Matchmaker. And I have the link there, which I know will get shared with you. So this, I know you can't read this, it's really busy, but I just want to make you aware that in that notice of intent, they just describe the different phases of the hub process, what is required at each phase. And so if you really wanted to dive deep into what's going on there, you can look at that NOI in this graphic. So here's our contact information. You can contact me. I've got my information there. We also have a website at Colorado, which has the MOU on it. It's got some other information. It's got our low carbon hydrogen roadmap and some other information. Here's the contact for New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. So thank you very much. And I'm very happy to meet all of you and hear what you have to say today.
Thank you, Maria. Very informative. And so, of course, this webinar is how to include the tribe. And so you mentioned, I have a quick question before we move on to Ed, but you mentioned that you're seeking input from tribes. Does that mean that you've had very little contact with the tribes in the 4-state area, or what's?
Well, yeah, that's one thing I want to be cognizant of. I know that, you know, at the state level, the states have different touch points with the tribes. Okay. And I know that each of our individual states have had different touch points with the tribes. So, but in the official WISH group that's working on the WISH, I think New Mexico has had some contact, but we could use a lot more input. We'd like to know if there's someone you'd specifically like us to contact or work with. Okay. And so cognizant and respectful of any conversations that have already taken place. We understand that there's a lot of things going on, but yeah, we'd like to have contact. Okay, yeah, I know there's many moving parts, and so, you know, between Steve and I, you know, we've heard feedback from different tribes, their role and possible involvement in the hydrogen hubs, and so, but great information. Thank you. We appreciate it. Love to talk to you. Doors wide open. Okay, we'll take you up on that. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Ed Salzberg, and Ed and I had the opportunity of being on a panel at the Reservation Economic Summit 2022 in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and Ed and his team, Dr. Salzberg, excuse me, has been working with some tribes in Oklahoma, and so I thought it'd be really, really beneficial, you know, to hear what's happening on that side. And so my understanding, there is a hydrogen hub, including Oklahoma, some other states in that area, and so, but the work that you're doing, Ed, is fantastic, and so I'll turn the time over to you to hear your good points. And so welcome, Ed, and I'll turn the time over to you. Thank you. Now you're on. We can't hear you, Ed.
This is going to be the mantra after COVID is you're on mute. You're on mute.
Exactly.
Thank you for inviting me to the panel. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Steve, and USEA. As well. And it's nice to hook back up with Wiley. Wiley is really an innovator in this space. His well site of the future, I thought, was really advanced, where he was already identifying methane as an issue and trying to close that down in the whole integrated fuel business, especially engineered releases. He's really a practical thinker, and just innovative, but also practical. I think the country should make a role for him as a national technology energy integration czar, or something along those lines. I thought that integrated energy system diagram he put up was just really kind of eye-opening because, you know, in the end, pollution is just molecules that are in the wrong place. And what he was showing there is where to get them into the right place. So I just really appreciated that presentation. I thought Maria's presentation about what the state of Colorado was doing was really enlightening because it's really indicative of what other states are doing as well. She talked about inventorying the assets. What do they have to bring to the table for hydrogen, and then using that to develop their hydrogen hub proposal. And I think hydrogen is not just about the hub. I mean, we were using hydrogen before there was the idea of the Department of Energy putting a lot of money into hydrogen. Hydrogen's already been used in manufacturing and has been used in energy. But what DOE is talking about is really accelerating that. And states and businesses and tribes across the country need to pay attention to that because money's coming down to accelerate the transition to this aspect of clean energy. And then she talked about the next steps in taking action. And I think there's messages there for tribes that I'm going to get into in just a second, that you should be working with the states that are involved in the hydrogen hubs because they are trying to advance the markets in their states, and tribes need to be part of that. I think there's a push and a pull. I think maybe the government is assuming that they're doing enough of a pull, but I don't think so. So I think it's up to tribes to push yourself into these discussions and become part of the programs. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. So hopefully you can all see my screen. And I'm going to transition from what the technologies are and what's happening technically, and also from the state level to really what's in it for Indian country, and why should tribes pay attention to this? And even more importantly, what are some pathways forward? So I'm going to talk about several things. First of all, I'm part of a new company that we set up about 3 years ago, Sovereign Resiliency Partners. We're working across tribal nations. Just going to talk about that for a second, maybe for credibility reasons. I'm going to spend a minute on why hydrogen energy is important, but I think that was covered, so I won't spend much time on that. Where the business opportunities are for hydrogen, and I think that's important to pay attention to. And what should tribes be thinking and doing right now to be able to follow the market as the hydrogen energy economy really advances and matures. And then finally, work we're doing with the Osage Mineral Council on hydrogen and getting involved in the hydrogen hub that's being proposed by the state of Oklahoma in the consortium. So let me just talk about these things quickly. So Sovereign Resiliency Partners is 4 of us running an organization that includes Mark Harding, who's Mashpee Wampanoag elder, who's our center of gravity for all the work we do for tribes. We did a really interesting smart reservation program for Tule. We're working with the Osage Mineral Council on sovereignty issues, aggregate feasibility study. They collect royalties, but they could be moving to ownership. A few other things that we're doing, including working with the tribe directly on a concept of a hydrogen roadmap, and then also a project that we're kicking off with the Tohono tribe on a smart energy vision. So why is there interest in hydrogen? Well, it's an energy source, but it's a clean energy source, and that's it in a nutshell. The United States doesn't have an energy problem. We have plenty of energy. What we don't have is enough clean energy, and hydrogen can play a role here because of other sources of clean energy are not dense enough. Wind and solar do not compete with oil because oil is a very dense, highly concentrated energy source, and solar and wind is not. You need a lot of spinning turbines, and you need a lot of sun to generate even a fraction of the energy that you get from fossil fuels. And if fossil fuels were clean, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But hydrogen then can be created in a way that it is clean and can take over that, can replace to a certain extent, fossil fuels for that dense energy need, which is baseload electricity, flying airplanes, other applications in which you need a source like a heavy, aggressive source like that. Unfortunately, it's expensive, so the Department of Energy is spending money to try to bring those costs down through technology and research, and then also through market development, which is the hubs. And there's also quite a bit of state and federal funding around that's coming in, because that the Department of Energy, any kind of a federal program with $8 billion coming in, it does attract other money. But hydrogen is not new. It's already being used in the existing hydrogen economy for feedstock, for industrial processes, and for energy. But what we're talking about is a new energy application for hydrogen, which is bringing it into the electric grid for power, to power planes, trains, and ships, to store energy so you can move it from place to place. And actually, stored energy like hydrogen can really back up a renewable energy system, so that the variability in wind and the variability in sunlight can really be underpinned by that dense energy source that can be a storage and a backup power source, and also for heating. So let me just move on quickly. Maria talked about the hubs briefly, and I just have some information here. She did mention there are 4 regional hubs. There may be more. State teams are forming for the RFP now, which is released in the fall, as she had said. And the eligible uses for that money is a variety of things. But if you look across all of the things that you can use the money for, what you're really seeing is that hydrogen is part of a new economy. In this interesting diagram from Carbon Brief, you can see that the hydrogen here is generated, and then it's used and it's moved around, and it's the center of a whole economy that is clean and also powerful enough to fly planes, to make cement, as Wiley was talking about. However, all of these pieces are not all in place. So the Department of Energy is funding the animation of the market, creating markets, which means the production, which means new technology in order to produce it cleanly, the transportation, the transfer, and then the transformation of hydrogen into the various energy uses. So without that money being spent to animate or accelerate the market would still develop, but we've got a climate issue and we can't wait that long. So DOE and other DOE and federal programs are pumping money here to really get all of these lines and connections moving, so that in the next 10 years or so, we actually have a hydrogen economy. Without it, it's going to be really slow. So where are the business opportunities? And I think Steve might have mentioned some of these. There's various parts of the business cycle that are needed. But in the hydrogen plan, there's a series of phases coming in, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if you can see, this takes place over 4 and probably more years to really be developed. So this is the DOE plan for what's happening in the different phases of the hydrogen hub development, from an initial phase of only a few $1 million, more then into a development phase, and then a construction phase, and then a ramp up and operating phase. So even though states have started to develop their hydrogen proposals for DOE, there's still time for tribes to participate, because we're talking about a 4 or 5 year phase in. The spending starts slowly. And as Maria had mentioned, tribal collaborations score hydrogen hub proposal points, and that's really key. If you knock on the door, there's going to be a ready answer on the other side. If tribes knock on the door, because tribal involvement does score points in this competition. I could get a little more detail on what is in the hydrogen supply chain, but it's important not to think that if you don't have a way to produce hydrogen, and as Wiley said, from methane, but also electrolysis from water, that you can't play in the hydrogen economy, because hydrogen has to be moved. So there's pipelines, roads, equipment that needs to be built in order to support that transportation. Hydrogen needs to be stored. And then there are a variety of applications in which all of these little circles mean new business being developed. So even if you don't have the assets to be a hydrogen producer, you may have the assets, tribes may have the assets to be a mover, storer, transporter, or user, end user of hydrogen. And that's an important point. And understanding where you play in here because of your particular situation is really key to move forward. So the Great Plains Institute about a year ago drew a bunch of circles on where hydrogen hubs would likely be centered. Well, they have to be centered in where the hydrogen can be produced. So that means near water and near methane, near natural gas. So here are some notional ideas that they had for where hydrogen hubs could be developed if they were developed naturally or if they were accelerated by a lot of money from the Department of Energy. And the criteria they used were based on factors like emissions, availability of fuel, the potential for geologic storage of hydrogen. Once you produce hydrogen, you're not always sticking it in the pipeline, moving it somewhere, putting it in a truck. It may have to be stored somewhere. That means underground storage. And I think Wiley might have talked about regulations for who owns the pore space, and that's what this is about. When you store hydrogen, who owns that space to store it, and also carbon dioxide, because methane does not work as a clean source of hydrogen unless you capture and store that carbon dioxide or use it somewhere else, like in that complicated diagram that Wiley showed. Here's what I know about the likely hub contenders now. So tribes in these states should be talking to their officials. Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, primarily in those states, are leading these efforts. So New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York are coming together on a hub. With a Democrat in the White House, that's a pretty good bet. West Virginia has its own proposal with Joe Manchin there. That's probably a pretty good bet. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia on another initiative that I've heard of. Oklahoma, where the Osage Tribe is that we work with, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma have come together. Texas is going it alone, and then Northern and Southern California. I hear rumors that there are two of them. I haven't confirmed that. And then independently, Washington, Arizona, Illinois, Nebraska, and Kentucky, I've heard that there may be hubs forming there too. And then what Maria talked about, which was the Intermountain Zone, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado. So there's a lot of work here, and there are state offices to talk to about where their programs are and how to get involved. And I would think that even if you're not in that state, that there'd be a ready ear to talk to that office about what you could bring to their proposal. I just pulled a map out of where tribes are. It's not a very good map, and I'm not even sure it's all that accurate. It's just to say that a lot of these circles and where reservations are, they really coexist together. So there is a lot of opportunity for tribes to play in these these hydrogen markets, their regional hydrogen markets, as they develop. Okay, so I put this one up again, but I put it here again because I want to talk about what tribes should be thinking and doing, and what you should be thinking about are these circles. What is it that you have or could develop on your reservation to get involved in the hydrogen market as it develops? And I would say that, this is a market like any other market. Why would you choose this one over some other one if you're thinking about economic development and growth on the reservation? I'd say the main reason is that the federal government's pumping a lot of money here. So this is going to be fast moving. That's clear. So there isn't any reason that you shouldn't get smart on the speed of this change, the money that's being spent, how it's spent, and how you can benefit from that in the long term by getting involved in the hydrogen hub programs. They're really, from my standpoint, there are really two kinds of tribes. One that have oil and gas, and they have a natural advantage. So, MHA in North Dakota, Southern Utes, Wind River Eastern Shoshone, and then others, Navajo, especially Crow. And then the tribe that we're working with, the Osage Nation in Oklahoma, still has 1 billion or more barrels, maybe several billions of oil. I'm not sure how much gas, but where there's oil, there's gas in the ground right now. And as I said before, other tribes, and the other set of tribes are the ones who don't have oil and gas, you're not out of the money. Because you may have water, which is needed for electrolysis. You may be near manufacturing, like Osage is close enough to Tulsa to benefit from that. You may have transportation routes that cross the reservation or come close enough to the reservation that the tribe can provide services to that transportation system. And then there are also, excuse me, workforce considerations. What are the jobs you can train your employees for, even your members for, even if those jobs maybe don't appear on the reservation, but they appear close by. So I would say what to do. You can't wait for the pull for the states and the federal government to pull you in. I don't believe. I think you've got to push and seek out the regional hydrogen hub leadership centered in the states, state economic offices, and I should have put the energy offices down too, Maria. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Osage approach here because perhaps it's a template or a model. At least it might give you a few things to think about. I think we're doing good on time. Good. Okay. A tribe can't do this on its own. So the starting place for the Osage was to take a look at what was happening in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma formed a hydrogen task force, I think in 2020 or 2021. And that they published their findings at the end of 2021. And so that report really became is their roadmap, like the one that Maria talks about in Colorado. And like Colorado, they looked at they did an inventory of what they have, and then they looked at near-term programs, how money could be invested in the short term, and then what would be done in the long term. And interestingly, they projected 5,000 jobs for engineering and maintenance, the whole supply chain, 15,000 jobs. I Osage look at that and say, there's a lot of jobs there. What can we do to get a lot of those jobs to the reservation? And $3 billion in capital investment. Sorry for coughing, I'm just getting a little bit dry, which means I'm probably talking too much. But let me just introduce the Osage tribe to those of you that don't know about it. And I'm not going to go into all of the history here, which would be a separate conversation, but it's in Oklahoma. It's in the north central part of Oklahoma. And the Osage Reservation is commensurate with the boundaries of the whole county, 1.5 million acres. Those acres were purchased at one time by the tribe from the Cherokee. That purchase really created a different situation for the Osage than many other tribes. When the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the U.S. government was trying to turn Indians into Americans and change the culture, they couldn't do that so much in the Osage country because Osage owned the land. So even though the land was broken up, which it had to be, into individual parcels, so instead of having a sort of a cultural way of managing the land as one entity, and it was broken up into individual ownership parcels, which could be sold to non-Osage individuals. So not all of the land is owned by the Osage, but because of that contract, what was written into the contract and into a special act of Congress in 1906 is that the Osage Nation is the beneficial owner of all the oil and gas and subsurface minerals in the county. Even though they don't own the surface, they do own everything beneath the surface. So no one can drill oil on the Osage Reservation without paying royalties to the Osage Nation, which is really good because they've made a lot of money on oil and gas. They're making money on aggregates and other things. But collecting royalties is just one thing. It's not owning the means of production. So we've been working with the Osage on looking at aggregates first, and looking at ways that the nation could not just collect royalties, but actually own the means of production, own the assets themselves and produce it themselves, which is a sovereignty issue for the tribe. The Osage Mineral Council administers the estate, and they have a lot of assets in Oklahoma. The Osage have a lot of assets too: natural gas, a lot of water, a lot of renewable energy, especially sun, geologic structures in order to store carbon dioxide, hydrogen, proximity to Tulsa. Looking forward, the Minerals Council looked at hydrogen as a risk reduction measure for them. I mean, oil and gas has been great for them, but who knows what the future is going to look like. There may be a big shift to renewables. It's hard to think that natural gas and oil, based on the geopolitical situation we're in right now, for example, that we would be turning completely away from fossil fuels. But climate change has an impact, and who knows what this is going to look like in 5 years. The acceleration to renewables may be quick, and having oil in the ground may not do you much good at one point in the future. So thinking of that, they're looking at ways to diversify the economic vitality of the nation. So we've proposed a feasibility study, excuse me, to the BIA. We should hear about in around September. And the purpose of that is to stay in touch with the market as it develops. So as the hydrogen hubs develop, Osage wants to be doing its own internal assessment, much like what Maria was talking about: a resource inventory. What's the production and manufacturing potential in the area? What's the storage potential? Where are we in terms of transportation and uses? Especially supporting the utility grid services, which I'll get back to in a second. And then also capacity building. One of the main questions is, do you want to get into this business at all? Which is really a strategy and marketing question. It has to do with sovereignty, culture, and the view of the tribe, the members of the tribe, to what their future should look like, and whether and more industrialization on the reservation is something that they can get behind. But if they do, then the capacity building in terms of permits, compliance, business regulatory structures is just really important to be able to develop businesses that are really aligned with the direction the market is going with. This is the first phase. The second phase is a market development plan over the next 5 years, and then over 10 years in parallel to it and extending longer is a 10-year Osage investment framework. So here's a way to think about what you might do in order to strategize within your tribal community on how to look at the business of hydrogen, the new market that's being developed, and the funding that's coming down through the Department of Energy. I mentioned hydrogen as part of your grid utility service. And one of the, and I want to pull that back into a talk to end with a concept of the resilient tribal reservation, which is a concept that we've been using and initiated with the Tule tribe, in which we look at energy, but not energy just in itself, because it's not energy that we're after. It's really what energy does. It moves things, it warms things, it powers things, and it's those things: transportation, water, wastewater, communications, environment, health. All of these benefits to the tribe is the reason why we develop energy. But since we're looking at energy, we want it to be clean, we want it to be efficient, we want it to be controllable, and we want it to be secure, and we want it to support the sovereignty ambitions of the nation. And while we're looking at hydrogen, what we realize that even if you can't or are not part of the hydrogen economy, you still could be a user of hydrogen and using hydrogen in order to provide services back to the grid. The electric grid, as more renewables come on, becomes increasingly unstable. Not so unstable that it can't move forward, but with with more than a certain amount of renewables on because of the intermittency of the sun and of the wind, there has to be more backup power there to take those downtimes and still make sure that the grid is working. Those electrons have to be there instantly when you flip your lights on. And so backup power like hydrogen is really important to it. So one way to think about this is if you do have a lot of sun, if you do have a lot of wind, and you do have water, you could get into the generation of electricity business in order to support the local electric grid. And so we're factoring that into our thinking as we think about the resilient reservation. I had mentioned my last slide here. So I had mentioned that I think there needs to be a real push from the tribes, and that you should not rely just on the federal programs, the state programs to pull you in. And so we've been involved in a few conversations about hydrogen hubs and what that may be. And I don't know the answer to that, but term has been kicked around a little bit. And one way for tribes to get involved in the hubs is to get involved in the ones that are right there. But maybe there's a broader way, thinking about the push-pull idea. Maybe it's a broader way to increase that pull of tribes into the hydrogen economy. And maybe there's some kind of an overlay here that could be thought of where tribes can be hooked into this overlay and be brought more universally, more collectively into the new hydrogen economy. And what that could actually be, I think, is a good discussion to have. And I think Derek is a perfect person to talk to about that. So let me stop there and see what questions come up and where you want to go from here, Derek.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Great presentation. I think now we'll let's see. We're at almost an hour and 15 minutes, so we do have 15 minutes. So let's open up for questions. I think we answered many that were on chat, and maybe some others will chime in here. So maybe between Steve and I, we can kind of get a discussion going here. I think the big thing for me, and that's why we're hosting this is, and I think we're trying to speak to it, is how can we get tribes involved? And I see Osage, for example, doing great work and setting up the plan. It sounds like there's a good roadmap there. And then Maria, you mentioned that there's efforts going on, and perhaps there's not many tribes involved. And when you start looking at this, it's complicated, but it's not complicated. And I think in many cases, when tribes start to look at this, they see the potential, in terms of capital, the dollars, and I think that's probably one impediment when tribes start to look at this. I guess my question is, how can a tribe get involved? I think there was one question here. So I have some tribes that are looking at this. Maybe what's step 1, step 2, step 3? I've kind of heard maybe the Osage model, do a plan. Maria, you're saying, reach out to a state. Wiley, there's a lot of things going on. And so, what could be step 1 and step 2 and step 3, as maybe some general framework or starting points. And I'll just turn it over to who can chime in quickly on that.
Well, I can add some context to that, Derek. And
Yeah.
I appreciate the kind words from Ed. And I apologize that I was so rushed in my presentation. I normally do a bit better job than that. And Maria really showed me up following me, so smooth and easy after my rushed one. But look, the thing that we've discovered in this whole process of not only repurposing existing fossil fuel facilities, but also building out these grassroots greenfield projects. Arizona and New Mexico are uniquely positioned. There's so many natural resources that can be captured there, in addition to the potential to store hydrogen. There's the reservoirs to sequester carbon they're not everywhere, but hydrogen storage in the salt domes is even more scarce. And at the project that or the roundtable that we were in Flagstaff, Steve and had some people there that talked about the geology in Arizona. We're big on Arizona and New Mexico and the opportunity that those two states provide. But as Ed pointed out, you do not have to have natural gas. You do not have to have these other natural resources and be able to capture the opportunity. And one of the processes that we're incorporating in our project in Ohio is the pyrolysis process, which can use coal as the feedstock. So if you have carbon sequestration capacity, coal is still a great natural resource that we can capture the energy from, but keep the emissions out of the air. And it's important that we're mindful of these opportunities whenever we look at these natural resources. And just because it's always been done a certain way, as with coal and natural gas and oil, you can scrape it all off and start all over and still capture the value, but eliminate or at least dramatically reduce the environmental impact. So the hydrogen hub development in Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, there's just a whole plethora of opportunities for sequestration, but transportation of hydrogen is difficult. My point is that there's a lot of feedstocks that hydrogen can be produced from that you don't have to have the existing infrastructure. You can road or rail those feedstocks in and still participate. And that's the point I wanted to make.
I'd like to, I think that I would like to, say that we're in a lot of beginning conversations with what does a hub mean in the WISH, in the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub. What's it going to look like? We have a lot of puzzle pieces that we're working to put together. And so, if there's a tribal group that is interested, and you're not really sure, it's okay to have some initial conversations about, because we'd be happy to talk to you about what you see as your resources. And, you wouldn't have to, I just want to emphasize, you don't have to come to us with a fully baked plan because we're willing to have conversations about where you see your value proposition or even very initial exploratory conversations at this point.
Excellent.
Yep.
Well, we do have one question here, and it's from Joseph Christensen. His question is, who will be the main builders and general contractors of these hydrogen projects? Will it be the major oil majors, renewable energy companies, or others? Good question. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
There's a very emphasized over and over again in the DOE materials for the clean hydrogen hubs that they want to see you produce good union secure jobs. So I would imagine that, in any job opportunities that are the result of a clean hydrogen hub would look to doing just that thing and involve the communities. They're very clear about that as well. We want to see community development and community jobs. So who is it? It should be the communities near the hubs.
Excellent. Steve, I'll throw it over to you. Questions?
Yeah, no, I think, one of the question that came up was also, as far as the tribe, when you look at this workforce, will it take a lot of retraining for this new type of workforce, like the new hydrogen economy? So if one of you could answer that.
Well, Steve, in the projects that we're developing, we're transitioning former coal power plant employees and industrial employees in Appalachia. The processes are similar. The safety concerns are similar. There is a bit of retraining, but the majority of the work is similar to the works that was performed in the past. The management and engineering, there is a lot of retraining there to expand the knowledge, to incorporate hydrogen as a fuel or hydrogen as a feedstock. But the training program, as far as we're concerned, there's a great knowledge base that's out there. And as I mentioned, we've worked on the Navajo Nation and several others, the Southern Utes. And there's a great workforce that's very knowledgeable. So the time required is relatively short.
Okay. It's not so much a question, it's more of a statement. Someone just texted me and said, it would be great to have the panelists talk to the tribal colleges as a unit across the country about these opportunities.
Yeah. I think that's a good suggestion. Actually, at the ResCon's Reservation Economics Summit last month, I did get the chance to talk to several tribal colleges there about bringing in at least some orientation, not just hydrogen, but energy overall, and try to, in an easy way, strengthen their programs and maybe pull some curriculum enrichment into degrees or certificates that are being issued now. And I think that's an excellent way to leverage the tribal workforce of the future.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of excitement about, this area, this sector of hydrogen, and, the tribes see an opportunity. And just by today's response, I could tell they are chomping at the bit too and saying, okay, how do we get in? How do we participate with this whole endeavor?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I thank you all. I think that's all of our questions that I got on my end. So again, I think we're almost at the bottom of the hour here. Very pleased with each of you's presentation, sharing your knowledge and your information with our audience. So I'll turn that back up to Derek to wrap it up. Derek?
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And I'll echo that. Good information, great questions. I'm going to turn the time over to Mike Moore. He usually has some great insight. And he's our lead contact with USDA. So, Mike.
Hey, Derek and Steve and Maria and Wiley and Ed, great program. I'm not talking a lot. I've been absorbing a lot, and it's a very, very hot topic for sure. One point that I was thinking of as I was listening through this in my interactions with Steve and Derek and some of the other folks is that the pathway to hydrogen gives some of the tribes that have these carbon, the fossil fuel resources that were being pushed as a liability, future liability, gives them a future resource value, something to continue to monetize for resource values for the different tribes that have these on their lands. Most of the discussions have been future liabilities because of fossil fuels, and that can get a little daunting. And so what's going on here is an opportunity for some of the tribes that have these resources to pursue hydrogen for that purpose as well, let alone the resiliency and things that go with it. And with that, I'm done talking. You guys got it all.
Yeah.
And really glad.
That really was the motivation for the Osage Mineral Council and Margot Gray that led the effort to take a close look at hydrogen. It's a diversification.
Yep.
And at some point, those assets are going to be liabilities.
Way to cut that off before it gets too big. I'm done, Derek.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Ed, Wiley, and Maria, and Steve, for being a part of this. And again, we've been charged to find some great speakers. You guys did a great job. This information will be posted on the USDA website. And what we're hoping for is some discussion, conversation, and action by our tribes out there. Like Mike said and others, there's great opportunities here. You just have to get involved and make it known that you want to be a part of this. And so we encourage the tribes that are listening or those that are supporting tribes, to reach out to the hubs that was shown here. A lot of information is taking place. And then, of course, be on the lookout for all the RFIs and announcements that come out from Department of Energy. I know that Michelle and her team at USEA are trying to post online opportunities that are coming about, funding opportunities. So we'll try to keep everybody in the loop. So it gets back down to just be curious and ask questions and be a part of it. And so that's kind of our, our final words of wisdom here. So on behalf of Sagebrush Hill Group and USEA and DOE, we thank everybody for being a part of this. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and that's covering ESG. And so another interesting phenomenon and new way of doing business. And so we're hoping to have some exciting and engaging speakers. So I want to again thank everybody for joining us, and we'll call this a day. And thank you everybody for joining us. So take care and have a great week. All right, we're going everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Bye bye.
See you next time.